The gearing system in DFO can be a bit intimidating, and a large part of that is due to there being a lot of equipment slots where you can marginally increase your character's stats. I'm sure you've come across most of them by now, but this wouldn't be a guide if I didn't reiterate the basics for you just in case. I'm joined here with Cinda, who will assist me in explaining these basics.
Hello newbie, I'm Cinda. You've probably walked by without saying a word to me since I don't really have any quests or really have any use at all. Why am I even still in this game? I mean, Roger still sells my heater pass, so...
Anyway, keep in mind that this is an introductory overview. We'll be going into much greater detail when they come up in their designated videos. I'll be using the words gear and equipment interchangeably throughout this guide. Just know that by that, I'm merely referring to anything that you can equip that will increase your character's stats. So, this guide won't be covering other stat boosters such as consumables or features like the mercenary system. As of level 90 cap, here are all of the possible slots where you can equip some kind of gear. Standard equipment encompasses most all of the gear that you can find in dungeon. All these standard equipment slots culminate on this screen, making 12 in total, not counting the title of course. You can get those by completing achievements in the title book, from participating in events, and or from Sarah packages. The standard gears are pivotal in endgame gearing due to the armors and accessories having access to immensely powerful set effects. Not to mention that a lot of non-set gear just being strong on their own. Those particulars will be hashed out in my endgame gearing guide, however, not this one. This will just be for the fundamentals, remember.
Yes, we have a lot of people in AR-D who are knowledgeable about standard equipment. They can help you make them stronger, make them tradable, or even change them completely. Lots of different things, whippersnappers, and luckily for you, the people here are always available to help you. Just don't get discouraged if things don't work out as planned.
In the Avatar tab, you have access to special avatars, which can also give your characters additional stats. The avatars themselves have stats on them, as well as a set effect for wearing multiple avatars of the same rarity. Their rarity can either be advanced or rare, with rare granting marginally greater stats. Each avatar can be embedded with 2 emblems, with rare also having access to platinum emblem slots. This in theory could give you a total of 10 avatar slots and 22 emblem slots. This system also confusingly serves as DFO's other moniker, Dress Up Fighter Online, which serves to give your character a cosmetic makeover.
Ah yes, Rick, may I refer you to Daphne about this subject? She may look bland, but she's an expert when it comes to dealing with avatars and emblems. Make sure you have a chat with her for details on them.
Your creature resides in a tab all on their own. They generally give your character raw stats and often have either a passive or some kind of active skill which boosts your character in some way. For instance, it could give you levels on key skills like your buff or your awakening, and or a temporary damage buff. Artifacts are used to buff the pet slightly, giving it lower cooldown on that skill, or maybe just another small boost to your character.
Ah yes, an old, and I mean very old colleague of mine, Oren, should be of some kind of assistance with creatures.
The insignia is a personal favorite of mine. Insignias can only be obtained from farming guild dungeons, and as such it's gear that requires you to be in a guild. The gemstones that you put into them are also obtained in those dungeons, so it's just a matter of playing the game and earning it. Admittedly, the stats that can be obtained are quite marginal, but it's stats that is kind of inexcusable not to have. Unlike a lot of gear in this game, insignias are not obtained by any means of RNG.
That shady fellow Buckin. Yeah, you almost forgot about him, didn't you? He knows about the insignia system. I wouldn't know because I don't have one. But I hear it's frowned upon not to have one.
Phew, that is a lot of stuff, and quite frankly just mentioning them doesn't do it justice. Each and every slot has nuances to them that again I'll cover in their respective videos. So for the sake of brevity, just know that if any of the aforementioned slots are empty, consider yourself missing out on a potential significant amount of extra benefits. It could be raw stats, levels on skills, or incredibly powerful effects like what you might find on creature skills. But knowing that you have them is only half the battle. Let's make sure that you understand how to read them as well. Your avatars, emblems, creatures, and insignia are all self-explanatory. You get them, they boost you as described, and that's really the end of it. Standard equipment, however, has all kinds of rules, attributes, and ways to improve them. So for the rest of the video, I'll only be referring to these types of gears. All standard equipment has a rarity. Just check them out here. I've listed them in increasing levels of rarity. At a glance, you can immediately tell what rarity you have based on the color of the border of an item. And look, it also says so right here. As you might expect, gear of higher rarity generally have stronger base stats and more potent gear effects. But don't ever count an item out just because it's of a lower tier of rarity.
It's like judging a book by its cover. It's much better practice to actually open up the book, or in this case, hover over your gear and read their effects. Don't forget to hit F4 or F8 while doing so, as sometimes some extra details can be hidden from view.
Item level serves two purposes. First, it describes the minimum level in which an item can be equipped. This limitation can be reduced by 10 by use of the Conqueror's Contract, allowing you to wear stronger gears earlier. Second, and more importantly, item level also determines the relative power scaling of the item. Generally, items of higher item level have higher base stats, though again, like the rarity, don't count an item out just because it's low level.
For instance, unique weapons in the level 60 range often have some very potent effects for the sake of swapping. Paladins of all levels can be considered for their buff swapping potential as well.
Again, more on those particulars will be covered in the end game gearing guide though. Not here. Both the equipment rarity and equipment level play a role in nearly all transfer and improvement methods. Mostly this just means higher costs in gold and or upgrade materials, but it also means your improvements will be comparatively more potent than an equivalent gear that is either of lower rarity or level. Keep that in mind. If you have an option, you'll get the most benefit for improving an equipment of the highest rarity and grade that you can. A less important, yet relevant attribute on your gear is its tradability. Most standard gear that is of rare, rarity, or lower is completely tradable, with some key exceptions. Once you go any higher than that, however, your gear may begin to have the following trade restrictions applied. Along the left side are the possible trade states an item may be in. Just by reading the table, an item that is tradable, sealed, or resealed will be eligible to be traded to anybody on the server, as it has no bound status. Anything that's labeled as untradeable or unsealed, however, is bound to that character, and the only way to take it off is to either transcend it or reseal it, depending on your options.
Grandis Gracia is an expert when it comes to transferring equipment. Rick is going to make everything confusing here, but you'll be seeing this little table again when you speak to her, no doubt about it.
Right, Cinda. Now just note that a lot of gear, especially the good gear, must be farmed on the character that you want them on. Almost everything powerful is untradeable, and if you want to give it to say one of your alts, it will most likely take an unreasonable amount of materials to do so. It's always easier to farm for standard gear on the character that you actually want them on. Raw stats on items constitute things like defense, attack, and the 4 primary stats: strength, intelligence, vitality, and spirit. You can generally find it in the upper portion of an item while hovering over it. A good rule of thumb is any stats that are white are considered raw stats. Each raw stat has a minimum and maximum value that it can roll. In other words, your raw stats are variable. For instance, it's possible that you could have 2 pieces of the exact same weapon, but one may inherently have more attack on it. Keep in mind that each gear can have several raw stats on it, so while it may be weak in one stat, it may be strong in another. Your gear type determines what kind of raw stats an item has. For instance, accessories always have magic defense, and armor's physical defense. Each equipment slot itself also generally has a few stats that are always found on them. I say generally because there are always some exceptions. Bracelets tend to always have some amount of strength and vitality on them. It'd be abnormal for bracelets to have intelligence on it, but you might find a special one with it. Or maybe there is gear that gives an abnormal amount of raw stats as per its design, things like that.
The raw stats are often overlooked because overall they contribute pretty minimally to your overall damage when compared to other things like set effects.
That's right, stats like elemental damage are really the only things that most classes really care about. But if you're being honest, it could play a huge role if you have a lot of gear with low rolls in their stat distribution. A way to describe this stat distribution is by the grade or quality. An item's grade is a loose way to describe the potency of the item's variable stats. In other words, it is a summary of how close your particular gear is to the maximum amount of raw stats that it could get. A 100% grade would essentially mean that you rolled the highest amount of stats that you could possibly get on that gear. Just remember that this grade is a culmination of all the variable stats on a gear. You could roll maximum in one stat but low in another, and thus your overall grade would just be average. If you get a bad grade, don't fret, you merely need to re-roll the grade with an item called the Kaleido Box. It's a Sarah item, but we've had plenty of events that give them as well. Syria also has a capability to trade a certain number of Kaleidos for a Master Kaleido, which will always give you a 100% grade. Also, did you know that you can use a Kaleido on your title? Sometimes the raw stat variants could be important, such as the elemental damage here on this title. Just figured that I'd mention. I also want to clarify the causal relationship of the variable stats and grade, because if you don't understand it, you can be misled. Item grade is determined by the values of your raw stats. If you attained a lot of high values on average amongst your raw stats, you will in turn receive a high grade. It doesn't work the other way around. When you use a Kaleido Box, you are not changing the grade as it seems to suggest. What you're doing is re-rolling the variable raw stats, which in turn determines that grade. Therefore, just because you have a gear that says it's superior doesn't really mean that you've rolled maximum on a stat that you really want.
If you have any question as to what the maximum amount of stats that you can get are, just refer to DFOpedia, which will display every item in the game at 100% grade.
Equipment options or gear effects encompass all of the extra goodies that come on a piece of equipment and is generally in blue at the bottom of the equipment. These options, unlike raw stats, are static, meaning that they are unaffected by grade or Kaleido boxes. They will always do the same thing. Now, what can the item do? Literally anything. It starts getting wild. It could give you levels on a skill, endow your weapon with an element, give some kind of buff, debuff temporarily, have a small chance to do a thing, give plus levels to certain skills but only if you're playing that class, reset your skills, give a potent aura debuff but only based off your reinforcement level, give more damage based on skills that aren't on your hotkey bar, do with this, do with that. I'm not even gonna try to explain. And that's just for the standard effects of a gear. You can also get set effects when wearing parts of the same gear, which could again be a wide range of things I won't bother getting into. It's an enormous topic in and of itself, tied closely with how damage works in this game, which is not covered in this guide. I'm gonna lump this all into item does a thing and sets also do another thing, and then file it away. It's not important for a gear fundamentals guide. And that about covers all of the gear slots and key gear attributes that you'll find on standard gear. I appreciate the help, Cinda, but as you know, there's still plenty to talk about. Who do you think we should go see next?
Well, before you talk about gear improvement, you should first cover the basics with disassembly. Go see Lotan next.
I just so love traveling to the West Coast. Let's go, newbie. Also, just a warning, this fellow is a little, well, let's just say special.